Morning. Welcome to our capping class.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here.
We're so excited for you to be here. I think to just get started, I'm going to give a short bio. So Lorena is currently the director of undergraduate studies at Stony Brook, but has worked as a master printer for a variety of places in New York and at Universal Limited Art Editions, and has taught printmaking at Cooper Union. And we're just really, really excited to hear from you and hear everything that you have to say.
Okay, I'm going to set my timer after 15 minutes because I should be done with my show and tell by 15 minutes. And then I've prepared answers to all of the questions. I tried to give some thoughtful responses and then leave enough time for questions. I don't want to be a space hog. So feel free to to like say, hey. I apologize. I didn't do the timing and I was editing my slides a lot. But I thought it might be fun to just like see the trajectory of images, um,
Definitely.
since some of the questions were about like how did you get to your imagery. No, I'm super excited.
Okay, awesome. Are you able to share your screen? I can.
Okay, did you get me? Yes. Okay. Yes, I am. Should I do it now?
Yes.
Alrighty. Let me go back. Okay, are we getting started?
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Oh, excellent. Okay, hold on. I want to see who's here. Hi. How many of you are here? Okay, I love this. Okay, thank you so much, Emily and Sydney and Ed, for inviting me. I am so thrilled. My meeting Ed was a highlight of my grad program, so I am really honored that I am pulled into your program. So I wanted to start a little bit with my background and with an image. Oops. Okay, here we go. Of little me when I was ready to go to Cooper Union. So I grew up on Long Island. I'm originally from Guatemala, and I received a scholarship. And I'm standing here in the rain, and my sweet mom had a clipping of the newspaper talking about this, and these are basically my portfolio pieces. So I went on to Cooper Union, which was a fantastic experience. Foundation training in painting, sculpture, graphic design, and I fell in love with printmaking, especially lithography, because I'm a drawer, and litho is super immediate. And with printmaking, as most of you already know, it's a great greedy medium where you have a record of every stage where you've gone. And I think that really influenced how I worked. Um, so after Cooper, I took a little sidetrack. I went to do some graduate work in Albany for Mesoamerican studies, and I took a year off at Cooper because it was incredibly intense, and I decided I wanted to be an ethnographer. So when I was there, I realized I was miserable and it was cold, and I was an artist, and what am I doing here? So I turned around and came to pound the pavement and ended up in New York, and I was really lucky. I had an opportunity to work in a print workshop as my first job, and it was a two-person operation, and it was a gallery in the front and a printmaking studio in the back, and this was in Tribeca. So the woman who hired me trusted me implicitly, and I already came with, a really nice range of skills in printmaking, and I really didn't want to go to grad school for art. I wasn't ready to commit because I wanted to keep learning, and I wanted to, do it on my feet with artists. So I was her hands, and I ran the workshop, and I was, really green behind the ears. But that trust was so empowering that I learned my stuff, and I did some fantastic projects with them. And then in 1987, there was a stock market crash. And she said, I'm not sure I could afford to keep you here. And her goal was to make sure that I could afford an apartment in Manhattan. And I was commuting to Long Island, which was, about an hour, an hour and a half. So she said, what can I do for you? And I said, make a phone call. So I had, while I was at Cooper, I had seen the show of Jasper John's retrospective at MoMA, and there were his 0 through 9 lithographs. And I thought, oh, wow, I could do that. And I didn't know what I was thinking, if I could do the art or I could print the art. But that really stayed in my mind. And in my little sketchbook, I wrote down what was the workshop that created this work. And that was ULAE. And I thought, one day I'm going to figure something out. I need to get there because they do awesome work. So then I said, make a call. So she called ULAE, and I think it was a Thursday, and I interviewed on Saturday, and I was working on Monday. And it was a little bit quirky because they were only men, and the first and main questions that they asked was, how tall was I, and how much did I weigh? And I was like, I don't know about this, but I was so excited. So then I ended up at ULAE. And ULAE was a really amazing place, and I knew that. They were the heroes. And I really had the honor of working with a nice range of artists. And being a professional print workshop, what they did was provide artists with an extension of their studio practice. They could reach another market, and they could create original works. It wasn't like they were reproducing existing images. They really wanted to guide an artist to work in a new medium and do original work in that way. And with that, they had technical resources to really dream up any project. They had collaborators, they had awesome facilities, and their projects could take months or even years. And nobody was ever going to rush them. That was no way. And one thing that was told to me when I interviewed was, I had printer seals, my chop. I have my own chop that my first boss said, you need this because you're a professional now. They saw that on my prints and they said, oh, no, you won't be doing that. And I said, no, of course not. And they said, there's only one artist in the room, and just be really clear that that's not you. So then I'm like, I was so honored for the opportunity. So I have images of a few of the artists that I worked with. So Robert Rauschenberg, I hope most of you are familiar with his work. His work dealt with photo imagery and travels throughout his life. And a lot of the fullness of the images was about the simultaneity of experience. So a lot of these layers were just melded, and the way that we would work is have the separations on film, and then he would juxtapose them, and we would make plates to be able to configure them as he wanted. And there's, familiar images from all over the world. And he worked on this incredible project, Rocky Overseas Cultural Interchange, where that was his way to work toward world peace and collaborating with printmakers throughout the world. So part of and he also had images where he would use reflective surfaces so that the individual would be a participant in the image, in the experience, like your face here. And he was incredible. It was like working with he traveled with an entourage, and it was like a happy party wherever he went. The TV was always on, lots of people coming out of a limo, and he would just like have a beautiful atmosphere when he came in. So another artist, and I'm just going to go quickly here so we can come back if we need to. Jasper Johns. So Jasper Johns was incredible. He's intense. And his imagery is about personal interests. He incorporates elements from famous imagery, lots of art historical references, and he does a lot of playing hide and seek. And he's got a really specific range of iconography. There's Matthias Grunewald's Eisenheim altarpiece that he references, and there's a fallen soldier where we'll see him repeatedly. He's here. He's embedded in here. This is a large lithograph. This famous Elizabeth and Philip's profiles in a silver jubilee vase. And with his imagery, he had his layering, and it transferred through so many media. A floor print of his childhood home, again, the fallen soldier. And he is somebody that in printmaking revisited his imagery. So this was done in 1991, red, yellow, blue. And then he'll come into the workshop and say, could you pull out those plates from red, yellow, blue. I want to work on them again. And so he would completely transform them. And the idea of revisiting your sketchbook, for example, you might find the imagery that you were considering or developing 10 years ago. Keep your sketchbook, go back and look. Your imagery is your imagery, and you find different ways of expressing what you need to say. And the printmaking process is perfect for that. So with Jasper, it was really very much about transformation and evolution in a way. Elizabeth Murray was one of the artists that I had the closest relationship with. So since I was the only female in the workshop, they naturally thought it was a great idea to put me with the women, which was very unusual at the time. But it was great because we really had good rapport. And her things were about family, home, daily aspects of living. And she was very playful, very cartoony, very joyful, lots of color layering. And the way that she worked was with colored pencils. She would do sketches continually on computer paper. And her paintings were three-dimensional. So a lot of her prints ended up being three-dimensional. She would have craftsmen construct canvas armatures and then stretch canvas over them. And we started doing that with our prints. And with the layering, as I was saying, this is a mezzotint, and I just want to mention this briefly. This was kind of an important piece for me. We had a shop at Watt Street in Manhattan, and instead of going to one of the workshops on Long Island, if the artists couldn't come out because they needed to be available for their kids after school, and Elizabeth had two daughters and a son that was already out of the house. So she had to be on call, and we were working on this mezzotint where the image was on the mezzotint, and I prepared plates for her to do monoprinting. So she would paint directly on the plate with completely vibrant colors while I was inking the plate, and we would be chatting. And then when I was ready, she was ready, we would run them, and it would meld into this like incredible tapestry of rich color, starting from like pure, loud color to this really meshed, rich surface. And it was during these private times that I kind of picked her brain about what it meant to be an artist and be a woman and have a family and wanting it all. So remembering that series was very, very significant to me. The three-dimensional prints were incredible. This one has like 120 printings, and it's printed on offset as well as transfer, and it's dimensional where the chimney, the doorknob, and the window pane protrude. So I was constructing these three-dimensional chimneys. And this is a lot of artists' work is really about self-portraiture. So her chest is bursting, and the smoke is coming out of the chimney, coming around and becoming part of the cobblestones. So this piece was die cut and then hand assembled. This was like my magnus opus in terms of a printmaker's portfolio. And other pieces were dimensional, and this was jazz. Another artist that I worked with was Kiki Smith, and her themes were very much about mortality, life, death in the body. Personal images were always coming into her work, and friends. And this was one of the first major pieces that she did with us, and it's called Banshee Pearls. And there are lots of Xerox transfers. There's her hands, a little portrait of her, a little photo of her when she was a little kid. There's her self-portrait with her drawing. She had some fun with a Xerox machine where she would smush her face against it, and then we would make transfers. And she's got these tattoos of little flowers throughout her body. And they look a little bit like doilies. So we made rubber stamps, and this is a silver leaf that we put over it. So each of these is 22 by 30 inches printed on this incredible silky Toronoko Japanese handmade paper. And all of these have anywhere from 4 to 7 plates on them each. And it's just like all stops were pulled out. It's a total extravaganza of technique. And that was intense. It took us a few years to develop this piece. Um, Another work that she did dealt with friends who had passed away from AIDS, and the constellations in the piece refer to the Kaposi sarcoma. And in the 80s, having AIDS was a death sentence. There was no cocktail, there was no solution, nothing to help you. And so she watched friends, including and her sister, pass away from AIDS. So this was a piece that was very very intense. And the sarcomas were little pieces of flocked. We shaved velvet and flocked it to create these textural spots. And this piece, et cetera, et cetera. While working on it, it was really complex. So this is a photogravure plate that's printed a la poupée with like 5 shades of brown. I printed the plate. And then this is a photo plate, actually a litho plate that was created by some of her embroidered doilies put over black. On the margin over here, she wrote, "Let me freeze again to death," etc., etc., etc. And we printed a 4-color offset Luna moth at the bottom. And it wasn't until later when I was doing a presentation on her work that I realized what this was about. So when working with the artist, you don't talk about the concept. You just talk about what are we doing, what are we doing, what are we doing. And this particular piece, again, dealt with early loss. And she was referencing Henry Purcell's King Arthur, where Klaus Nomi, who was a famous singer and gay activist who sang it, that was his song, and he would have this very austere makeup, and he would be in costume, and he was close to David Bowie. And there's actually a Saturday Night Live where you see him performing with David Bowie. But if you Google Klaus Nomi, he sings "Let Me Freeze," this Henry Purcell song, and you could just like Google "Let Me Freeze Again to Death," and he sings it as if he's freezing to death. And Henry Purcell also died young. He had a lung condition, and he knew he was dying. So a lot of the AIDS victims knew that they were dying. And when I found out about this, it was like the kind of things like when you're working in the studio, you're having goofy conversations about everything under the sun and not the content. And that really completely changed my sense of who I had worked with, because this was after I had already left ULAE. James Hammond's work was about tricks, her personal iconography. There was always a woman in bondage, a baby in a walker, Aztec dancer, clowns, ballerinas. And this was supposed to be a foldable board game. This was really large. And it had every technique: hard ground, soft ground, litho, offset litho, and the house is silk screened. So basically she wanted this to be a parlor game where the attendees would take these elements and decide where in the house they should belong. And we were saying, Jane, there is no way anybody is going to pay this for this piece and then play with it. It's not happening. So we ended up leaving it flat. She wanted to make sure that it could fold in a box. And this was one of the most memorable, I don't know, / ridiculous projects that I worked on. This was actually a clown suit. And I also was working on a ballerina tutu with her. And this was made with a pattern, and it's made with handmade cheery that has litho and silkscreen. And if somebody were really small, they could fit into this. And it was stitched on a sewing machine after all the printings, and I was basically making clown suits for a long time. And a lot of very fancy collectors would purchase this for their kids' nursery. Okay, Lisa Yuskavich, her image was straightforward, and she really wanted to do some straightforward lithography because everybody was doing these big, fast, extravaganza sort of projects, and she just wanted to do stone lithography and feel that she was on a stone. So we printed it directly. And there is one studio at ULAE that's just full of stones, and it was the original studio from the 1950s, and we worked on that. Terry Winters, We did handmade books. We had letterpress. So some of the projects were incredibly special in this way. And his work was about mathematical models and their relationship to forms. And he would be working with nature-based geometric formulas. And this was just one of the projects that he collaborated with a Swiss theorist slash philosopher, Jean Starobinski. Yes, and it was in French and it was in English. So here we are printing it, goofing around, speaking French-ish. Suzanne McClelland. This was a project that might have been another one that was over the top. She had memories of working on an Etch-a-Sketch and playing the game Red Rover. So she wanted to have a box that had a rolling image. So we had this scroll of a print that was coiled and it would roll. So you would send the box back and forth saying Red Rover, and it would actually go with momentum. And what it says is over and over and over, Red Rover. This is the inside of the studio. We were working on a project, and that's me. We're working on a large offset litho press. This is me. I had 4 kids in the process of working there. And I would have days where I was in a respirator the entire time. So this was a really strange time. If any of you have ever looked at the Tamarind Book of Lithography, you will see images of master printers working on projects, bare hands, can of kerosene, and a cigarette popping out of their mouth. Because the guys made fun of me because I insisted on wearing gloves, because I thought my babies are going to just associate me with rough hands. So I basically had my full pregnancies, never missing a day of work until it was time to deliver. And this is assembling jazz. And everything we had in the workshop, all the tables were on wheels. So every project could have the space reconfigured. So that's basically what I did for my studio. I thought that was awesome because you never know what you're going to be doing, and you never know the scale. So that was a lot of fun. So that was my little blurb about my artists that I worked with. And I'm just going to go quickly over some of my work, and then I'll come to your questions if that's good.
Yeah, definitely. Take your time.
Okay. I'm kind of going quickly, so I give you guys plenty of time to speak to me. Okay. So I'm a drawer. And while I was I was working at ULE, I was invited to give a talk at Cooper Union. And I went in and gave a talk, and I brought examples of some of the projects that I had worked on. It was for an advanced printmaking class. And then they invited me to teach there. And they were setting up a new studio where they were doing away with zinc and nitric and changing it to copper and ferric, because they had realized that the nitric had basically eaten through their ducts. There were no ducts when they cut through the walls. So they wanted to revise how it was taught, and I was there, fresh person. So that was really kind of exciting. So being invited to teach, I thought, okay, I've been working professionally. What am I going to teach them? So my first thought was, as a collaborator, okay, what do you want to know? But I thought, no, we can't do it that way. So I needed to have examples. And that really forced me to getting into my work, because I needed to show students what's a hard ground, what's an aqua tint, how to do a chincolet. So I've always collected, and I had one of my colleagues at ULE was a hobbyist entomologist, and it turns out that he's a specialist in mounting tarantula sheds for the Museum of Natural History. Very humble guy, and he actually did, if you go to the Bronx Zoo, across from the gorilla display, there's this beautiful spiral of an insect collection. And he's the one that mounted that. So he would order insects from Papua New Guinea and rehydrate them. And he would do show and tells for my kids' classes, showing his insect collections. So at one point he gave me a lot of his throwaways, which I was terrified would have an infestation inside my house. So I ended up putting them in a shed, and they were totally munched away. So a lot of my creatures are domestic. So this is a shed that I found in a tree. Actually when I was 12, and I thought it was so magical I saved it, which is very weird. but I had it. I still had it in a little jar. Regular household creatures that I collected and then drew to use as examples for my teaching. And that was the most exhilarating thing for me, being forced to get into my work. And it was a tricky thing because when you're teaching a Cooper, these kids are the best of the best, and a lot of them are very critical, and they absolutely want to see, so what do you do? And I had to, again, leave my ego at the door and not think about it and just say, hey, I'm coming with honesty. I'm coming to teach you. I have something to teach you. So I have, my ego's not an issue here. So a lot of these are sometimes the same creature. And this was just a regular beetle that was like freaking me out at the curtain while I was sleeping. I was thinking it was getting into my hair. But in the morning, it was like, wow, yeah, can't break those antennas. So another thing that I did was I had friends who fish, and I love ugly fish or quirky fish. And the next time you go fishing or have a live fish, check out their teeth. So this was a trigger fish, and I needed to save my proofs to then go from hard ground. And this was a recycled plate. Usually it was always throwing away plates, so I would get the recycled plates and work on the backs of them. And the funny thing was with the plate that's already got a little bit of a history, it kind of takes the pressure off. So this was my hard ground state, and then I took it to a soft ground, and then a spit bite, and then opening it up. So the one thing that I always tell my students, it's like you never know what you're going to end up doing. So print state proofs and save them, because you really want to be able to show the progression, and it's actually really good for you for your own thinking. Just to know, should I have gone back? Should I, stepping forward? And I now do that sometimes with my drawings when I'm feeling a little bit chickeny. But it's kind of liberating to know that you can go back, or that you could have several copies and then have the guts to go forward. So that, I think, really helped my thinking. I have a garden. I'm fascinated by all things botanical. And so with my 4 daughters, they're not without accidents. And at one point, actually at 2 points, we had eye accidents. And one was a puncture to the sclera. My daughters were at Home Depot with my husband, and they were fighting over a little caulking tube. And then somebody let go, and then somebody got stabbed in the eye. So I was thinking a lot about eyes and drawing them and looking at irises, because we had to keep looking for scarring because your eye heals very fast. And then I had another daughter who got a paper cut across her cornea, opening up birthday gifts. And when you think of the Louis Buñuel film, The Chien d'Andalou, where there's the blade going across the moon, it was totally that. And the cornea is the only part of your eye that actually senses pain. So it was kind of horrific for our family, having a 3-year-old in excruciating pain. So I did a lot of eyes. And then also thinking about eyes and identifying eyes, that they could belong to different creatures. And I had a student that wanted to learn how to engrave. I didn't know how to engrave, so I learned how to engrave. So I could teach him how to engrave. So this is engraving and hand rock mezzotint. And I called it eagle eye because then I started thinking, it's like there's a universality to a lot of the forms. And that to me was more interesting than drawing something that you could clearly identify and say, I know what I see, I'm good enough. And that wasn't enough. I really wanted to keep it a little bit amorphous. And this is a hand rock mezzotint that felt a little cosmic to me, that I just enjoyed the spaces and looking into your eyes. And so my kids are accustomed to me staring at them and looking at the pond scum in there, just the layers of magic through water. So at one point I realized I have 4 little girls. I'm commuting to Manhattan. I'm many hours away from them. And they were little and getting into all sorts of mischief. And so I said to my husband, I think I need a master's. I need to go back to school, because if I want to teach someplace other than the places that are going to hire you because you're a professional, I need to have this. So I started working on images, and I didn't have a studio. I literally I didn't have enough space to even put another drawing next to the other. So it was I was only looking at one image at a time. And working for many years as a printmaker, you get a lot of tension in your back. So I wanted to create images that really gave visual form to sensation, to what I was feeling. And at one point, it's always something really unglamorous. I herniated a disc moving a baby car seat into the back of a car. It's like something very awful usually happens in unglamorous ways. And I remember sitting at a concert in excruciating pain, trying to visualize what is screaming in my lower back. So that's my screaming pelvis. And one day I was cooking soup, and chicken soup. And there was a perfect little set of vertebra. And I saved it, and I boiled it, and I bleached it, and I drew it. And I thought, this is magic. And you would ask, what is it? It's a spine, of course. And I thought, interesting. And the form to me is just exciting. So I entered the graduate program at Stony Brook, and I started working on studies of spines and bones. And at that point, I had a daughter who was in 11th grade and very stressed out. And I felt her pain, and I felt this like ripping sensation through my heart that I couldn't help this kid. But then I'm thinking of the sensation, but I'm also thinking of like structurally, what am I drawing here? This could be a chicken. I could be flaying, I could be like what's called spatchcocking a chicken, but that's me. So I called it flayed, but it could be chicken. So I started working on these pieces, and I was lapping together sheets of paper because I was going larger than I could. And that's when I started changing my scale, because it wasn't enough to draw on a 22 by 30 ready to go sheet of paper. So this is 6 sheets of paper that were put together to create the space. And at Stony Brook, I had a huge studio, and that's what made it possible. I had a smaller one, and then they gave me a larger one because my work just kept growing. So that was something I didn't have before. I didn't have a studio practice. And I had always kept a sketchbook. And I was frustrated when I was at ULE thinking, I'm never going to do my own work. I'm never going to do my own work. I'm miserable. I'm never going to do my own work. And when I had my first daughter, she was a C-section, and she was a breech. And back in those days, they took an x-ray to see if they could deliver her safely. So this is an x-ray of my daughter inside my pelvis before I delivered her. And of course, I made a contact print of the x-ray. And I thought that was the most magical image ever. And I put my x-ray aside, and I thought, I have to revisit this just because this is universal. This totally rocked my world. So then I started sketching and visualizing, and I didn't have a studio space. This was tucked in a drawer, so I didn't have the space to put something and keep looking at it for a reference. So I was just drawing what I was thinking about. I didn't want to copy what I was seeing, because what I was seeing, that was it, you know. But I really wanted to talk about sensation with the work. So I drew a lot, and this was a lithograph that I went and highlighted. And part of doing anything is understanding what you're looking at and giving yourself many perspectives. But mostly for me, it would be sensory. And I collect all sorts of things. I do between semesters, I would do children's programs. And at this point, I had left ULE. And I started just drawing from my collection. So this is a whelk egg case. And just the form was something so engaging. And the spine found its way to my work. That chicken spine was really pulling my work in different directions, because that became me. I was that spine. And I was thinking of pods and milkweed. I have milkweed plants and a magnolia tree that were a big source of my inspiration. And again, my insects. So part of what I was doing was putting these images down, and it wasn't something that I sketched it out ahead of time. It would just go from one place to another, and I started with an insect's thorax, and next thing you know, I was drawing a pelvis and some strange things that were happening below. And it was really sort of quirky, because at the MFA program, we would exhibit in a gallery in the library. So you had people, since it's a university, there's a medical school, you have people from all sorts of disciplines coming, and they're looking at the work saying, what part of the body is that? And I'm thinking, well, what part of the body do you think it is? So I would do like straightforward studies and then take them somewhere else. And this is a really large piece. I wanted you to really feel the tremendousness of being a vessel, of having a child travel through you. And this is life size. So for me, for a while, it just felt really important that it was life size. Um, so this final image was basically a conversation between the magnolia and this gigantic pelvis, and this guy was born from it. And this is the one image that somebody said, I'm trying to figure out what view that is. I'm thinking, me too. But I wouldn't say that. I'd be just like letting somebody engage with, like, what am I looking at? I'm like, what do you think you're looking at? Um, this is also really large. I was very enamored with having a lot of space. It's really hard to go back. So I did a series on works that were really just trying to communicate some of this like really quiet anguish. I fell. I had a meniscectomy, and of course, when somebody's going to do a procedure on you, they'll give you all this medical terminology, and you see all your visualizing materials, and you're like, oh my goodness, that is such a complicated structure. They're going to do what? How are they going to do that? So with my knee surgery, that's where my head went. And I created a full landscape of that. And a lot of other images ended up popping in there. Got all sorts of nerve pain. Got to watch out from putting your elbows on surfaces. They'll kill your ulnar nerve. So then I became these pods. And I didn't want to give them goofy names. I wanted to basically take you to the plant and then say, what? And this is the dorsal cleft. My kids sometimes help me name things. And again, just that trying to translate sensation. And no, it is so not anatomically correct. And it would be very disturbing if that was what my physiology really looked like. But these are really large, and I wanted to really have a larger than life experience. And continually just like doing studies of images. And a lot of these are on my website, so I don't want to bore you. But I just wanted to show you where they sort of come together, that I've got a memory of having drawn something. It's like you know where you've been before, so you know it. And it finds its way into your work subconsciously. And this is a dragonfly naiad, and I did studies on the metamorphosis. And then all of a sudden, here comes my spine again, and I guess it's a self-portrait. It's like I totally sprouted wings. We visit this little gull island off of Block Island, and there's all sorts of little skeletized, compressed former life. So I would collect that, and there's lots of banded birds. So I would get the bands and email them and let them know that I found their creature for their study. So then I thought I have every right to be here because I'm actually helping with their research. So, and it's just like the frailty of life and just textures, and for me that is exciting to me. My daughter went to Fredonia for a little while and hated it. We went up for one concert and we walked around Lake Erie, and I found this little skull, just part of it. And it was such a glimpse at just this architecture of these spaces and cavities to help the fish do what they need to do. And everything was poisoned. Everything was rust colored. All the bones, I found deer vertebra, all sorts of fish vertebrae. And I kept thinking of just like poisoned water. And then I had my imaginings. So I knew this head. And then I always have these fantasy images of me deep sea underwater meeting these skeletal remains. Again, my nerve issues aren't going away. But a lot of times I'll go ahead and I'll find, yes, this dragonfly wing is there, and I've got like some roots and bark and trees. And here I had a torn rotator cuff and I needed surgery. And just when I'm feeling really strong and I'm teaching litho and I'm doing all these like, tough things, my shoulder gives up on me. And I just kept thinking, I'm trying to fly here. And a lot of what I ended up depicting had references to some of my botanical sources. And I exhibited this, and an osteopath, the husband of a friend, said, "Were you looking at bone marrow? Were you looking at dissections?" And it was really happenstance that yes, these are universal shapes and forms and cavities, um, and your viewer walks in with their visual recollections. Um, so working through it. So I had my torn rotator cuff, and my mom died 2 days later. So this was my right hand, and I'm right-handed. So I couldn't even raise my arm. So I was in my studio morning, and I put a little stump in my left hand, and I realized it's all here. It's in your brain, because all of your knowledge extends to your whole body. And all I needed to do was to find the right grip. So my little tiny stumps of charcoal were what I used to do these drawings. And I needed to have like solitude and meditation. And so my family basically left me alone in my studio with my bones, and they would help me to prop things up. And these drawings had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I would sketch them, and I could finish them, and I wouldn't overthink them. And this was my time to get to know my collection. And it was dark, and it was finite, and it really helped a lot. They were blunt, they were compositional studies, but that was my time to get to know something and to get my head out of where I was or get through it. Because you kind of need to feel the pain. You need to have the sadness of somebody that's gone. So that's what I was doing. And this is a picture of some work on my wall as I was going through it. And we would sometimes go to Maine. We would try to go to Maine every summer. And I would always just draw the rocks. So that was in my mind. And my mom was everything. So I felt like I was falling in. And this is really pretty big. And it's kind of work that you never plan to show it. You just need to do it. And I lost my dad. And he actually was living in Guatemala, and he came with this massive brain tumor. And his wife said, "You're our only hope." And by the time he came to New York, he didn't know who I was. So there I was, doing everything I could, bringing him to the hospital, taking care of my stepmother, and just trying to be polite about how I was feeling, and just taking it to the studio. And the final works that I put up were basically dealing with feeling like I'm delaminating, and us being in a pandemic. Really, it's existential. It's like in our lifetime. Nobody in their lifetime has lived through something like this. 1918 pandemic was one thing, but this was global. It was just, it's so much. And part of it was just like feeling like I'm drifting. And a lot of times I'll have drawings that I'm like, oh, I don't know if it's doing it. And I'm not sure if this is doing it. But with all honesty, I stopped. The flow stopped, so I stopped. And I have ammonites to like really allude to, we're dealing with history and prehistory. And this is limbo, where I felt my seed pods with no place to germinate, which is how a lot of students have felt, that what they thought was going to be out there for them may not be. And the quality of light really wanted to talk about like a solarized quality. Like in photography, when you open the darkroom door prematurely and you haven't fixed the image, you get this strange aura around your images, and that's really what I wanted to describe with how I was handling the negative space, just to give it this surreal quality of us floating in our own little protective pods, waiting to germinate, waiting for something. And this was a second one with trying to tentatively go out um, and release. And we don't know if any of them are going to germinate. Seems morbid. I know. It's unknown. So another thing that I wanted to just mention, part of my practice in collecting and really finding places to rest your soul was working with kids. So I've worked with college students a lot. And I had a local teacher that wrote a grant, and she invited me to come to work as a visiting artist with her students. She wanted to present them to what she called a real artist. And so I would bring in my images and talk about what I was looking at, and bring in my bugs, bring in what I was drawing, like simple magic. And these were my 600 new friends. Every January, I would have 600 new little friends, and I would work with every single class after class after class. 45 minutes, it was manic, shifting gears to different age levels. I even did one session in Spanish for the ESL class. And I did this over the years, and it was funny because I learned so much from talking to these kids and just like validating their ideas. So I would do a show and tell, and then I would show them prints. And the teacher actually got a grant to purchase a press after I did a visiting, and I had a woodblock prints, and I wanted to teach them to do intaglio on plexi. So we had kindergartners doing little intaglio on plexi with their needles, and that helped her program grow, and that helped me so much because there was like this fresh honesty. And one kid at one point said, the teacher's like, "Oh, tell Miss Lorena how much you love this." And then one kid said, "This was boring." And I said, "What? You're killing me." And he said, "This was boring." And their teachers would have put their smock on, "You're going to art." And he said, "We didn't do anything." And I said, "You're right. You're absolutely right." So I said, "I'm not going to make that mistake again." So I got my little show and tell encased bugs. So they would pass things around and we would draw together. So I did it over a few years. And it was as good for me as it was for them, maybe more so. So one point I had an experimental printmaking class, and I brought them to ULAE, and they rolled out the red carpet. And they pulled out some of the major projects that I worked on so that my students could look at them and I could describe them to them. So this was Shack with some of my students. And we had a visiting artist, Dred Scott and Jenny Pollock, come to Stony Brook. And I was the only one that was there to do it, but I said, okay, I'll step in and do this. And we created a collaborative opportunity for some students to work on several prints with them. And they were literally guiding these artists. They were the collaborators, working right alongside them, having regular conversations. And over here on the right, this is Andrea working with Jenny Pollock, and she had never drawn on a litho stone. So this is us signing. And so this is the kind of thing that I did while at ULAE in much humbler spaces, but my students were a part of it, and that was key. And yeah, and I printed these for my students once I couldn't get on the press to share an edition with them, and I made up a shirt for my students, and it's Lithos Not for Babies. And my final thing, I was program manager at a not-for-profit gallery, and we created a green space. So people donated 3 presses. So we have a green workshop that is open to classes, and I teach paper making, which is a blast. And it's simple and doable. And we also started, I started a monitor program where a lot of my former students go, and before they go to grad school, they have a place to work as monitors. So if they volunteer 1 hour, they get 2 studio hours in exchange. And we also have the summer program, which is what's happening here. And that's me, and on Kite Day.
you so much for sharing that with us. I loved seeing your work progression and every artist that you worked with and working with kids, and that was really fantastic. I guess I'll open the floor off to anyone who has any questions immediately.
Okay. I have all of your questions also that you, so we could ask questions and then I could answer questions.
Definitely.
Should I go?
Hi, sorry. So throughout your work, you use this very sort of like, I don't know, it was sort of interesting seeing how you sort of like would in your printmaking work, there were like the ones where there's sort of like the switch between like the mezzanine ones where you're using the lighter strokes on top of darker. Sorry, I'm not super I'm not very good at printmaking myself, but I'm trying. But the way that you sort of switch. So I think it's that I really like one aspect of your work, which is the fact that it's the lighter strokes on darker, because they all really seem to glow from within. And I don't really know if this is a question so much as this is me just sort of like saying that I don't know, like when I look at your work, it really does look like it's sort of glowing from inside out. And I really like that effect. And I think it's very amazing how you were able to create that. So that was not a question, but I wanted to say that, Spree.
I have one. Thank you. I have one drawing on my website that a print. It's a magnolia, and I dedicated it to my daughter. And with that, so it's like a totally goofy idea. And my thought was, I want to do an image that makes you feel like you're in love.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you do that? How do you do that? So it's like I can show you. You can feel my pain if you even come close to experiencing something like that. But to make you feel like you're full, like there's a fullness, and yeah, that's important to me. And it's tricky to figure out tools to make it happen.
Yeah, no, I definitely got that sensation when I looked at your work. So thank you.
Should I go through the questions that were posed to me that you guys sent?
I have a quick one before we start doing that. So you mentioned working with like an entomologist and different, you have like kind of this, you're looking at like art kind of through a science lens in a way, but have you ever worked with scientists while you're making these?
No, and I should write a grant and do something like that. Okay, so on my wish list, I still don't have a microscope, and every Christmas I joke I'd like an electron microscope, a used one. I'll be good. My curiosity is more like that of a kid. I love looking at everything. My husband had this huge gash. He sliced his arm he's a contractor, and he actually got them to take a photograph before they stitched them up, because he said my wife would kill me if I didn't show her what it looked like, because you can actually like see, it was like a horror movie, but there wasn't a lot of blood. It was just like this floppy skin, and you could see the muscle, and it's the kind of thing, it's like, I want to know what I look like. I want to know what everybody looks, if they let me look. Somebody's doing a procedure in your mouth. Can I see? Can I see the nerve? Can I see? Just so that you know. And especially if it's your own body. Like I had the C-sections, and I asked somebody to take a photograph of my insides. I didn't feel anything, and I could see the reflection. I knew there was plenty of good stuff to look at. But my husband's like, no, I'm not taking the picture. But one of the anesthesiologists did. And it's just like so fascinating that we have access to seeing so much and knowing so much. No, it's out of pure curiosity. Sometimes they say it's morbid curiosity, but pure curiosity.
Thank you.
But I have no science background, and most of everything comes from collecting, observing, and just like living, which is why I think I try to make my work universal in that way, and that I know that you can feel that.
Yeah, definitely. And when I was looking at your work, it's kind of, it feels like you're like the whole thing we're saying, it's like giving a visual form to sensation, and you could really feel that and feel that it's like the and also it felt like very accurate, and it felt like I was actually looking at the real thing. And it reminded me of like I think Irving Gaius, who did like DNA illustrations for scientists and stuff. And I that's why I wanted to ask, because it felt like you worked with scientists with your work.
But most scientists are artists, and it's like documenting on the field. That's exactly what they did. They went and like the work of Ernst Haeckel. with the Radiolarians. So then he took a little bit too much artistic license and got in trouble for that. So that he wasn't legitimate by the artist because he was too illustrative. And then the scientist said, this is bogus. This isn't real. So yeah, that was a fine line, but it's out of like pure joy at looking and knowing. Yeah. So I basically covered the first question. Okay, the majority of my imagery is from natural forms. How did I come to my subject matter? Just by living and finding them. Transformations, creatures, metamorphosis, seasonal cycles of plant life, and systems and structures in the human body, skeletal, muscular, vascular, neural, my personal experiences, sensory experiences, and just like wanting to document them. And it's really, it sounds very pathetic, but it's like when I'm like physically in pain, I can visualize it so much clearly. So it's not like, oh, I'm dying, but I got to put the mark down. And it kind of is that way. It's like when I'm in pain, it flows. I know exactly what I'm putting down, and it's really pure. Evoking, okay, the second question. Through my imagery, I want to evoke unconscious associations with the natural world, pulling the viewer into ambiguously familiar terrain. And some of the images that I showed and described about the X-ray, yeah, I want you to find passages, elements that are familiar. Yeah, I draw to understand. And my spine can easily morph into that of a fish or the thorax of an insect. I could sprout insect wings or become part of a vast network of nerves that become the skeletal form of a flower or a seed pod. My garden looks like, in the winter, it looks like garbage. It's like everybody's like, don't you want to? No, like, no, leave it alone, leave it alone. And that's where things become skeletized and magical. I think that I achieve that. I think that I do it by creating a layered experience. Changes are integral to the process of creating an image. And I work additively and subtractively, going back and forth as the image emerges. Visible erasures reveal a physical memory of a history of the form, not unlike a natural metamorphosis. So sometimes I'll literally like erase holes into my paper, and it's like it'll literally go through part of that process of transformation. And in those changes, I try to compress time or to reveal the conceptual and physical experience of change. My process deconstructs the realism I often begin with. So this is one point that I did want to emphasize, that stepping from realism into abstraction gives you an entry point. It gives the viewer a space to enter from their personal perspective. So being literal and having that sort of like an Ernst Haeckel, it is what it is. And I don't want anything to be anything. I want it to be that and that and that. And I want you to find it. I do want to play a little bit of hide and seek, and you'll find or seek only what might be familiar to you, and everything else might be lost on you the first time. But I want you to like take a trip and take a ride, and do it again and again. Is there any advice I think is particularly important? And I really thought about these questions for people entering creative fields. Okay, number one, I feel that it's extremely important to have a strong work ethic, to develop real skill sets, to know your craft, and to have personal discipline. You need to be or learn to be flexible and resilient. Artists will need to find their own direction. Clarity regarding what your objectives are helps. You don't need to have it all planned out, because you need to allow yourself to grow and develop as a person in the process. Be curious, be humble, have a sense of self, know who you are, and know what matters to you. Find mentors. They will be there for you. Ask questions, and don't be shy or embarrassed to ask questions. Being an artist is something that we are, something that we need to be. Knowing what you don't want is often as, if not more important than knowing what you do want, and finding that direction for yourself. It's not laid out like other areas of employment, being an artist. It's not. The art world is continually evolving with media, international collaborations, new ways of exhibiting. So you have to stay alert. Make time for collaborating and networking. Support your fellow artists. Be there for them. Say yes. when you're asked to help out. Say yes to opportunities, even if you're not 100% sure of yourself, even if you're not sure that you're the right person. Say yes. They know better, and you won't crash and burn. I regret saying no more than I regret saying yes. Opportunities open up in unexpected times and ways. Be ready, show up, be on time. Most important, make the work. It's about the work. So you can be a networker, you can be a chatty patty, but you got to make the work. It's all about the work. Yeah. Has my artistic process changed over the last year? Has art helped me feel comfortable or created a way to address your feelings of uncertainty? The past year has been compressed in so many ways. Beyond the pandemic, we've been in a world of war, of hatred, of killings, and the world in pain of too many kinds, and in continual grief. The world is in continual grief. So the desire to make art was tough. Working, going online and transforming studio courses for Zoom and creating like asynchronous delivery for personal engagement, that was all consuming. I never slept. It was horrible. I'm teaching in person now, which I'm so thankful. Setting up virtual exhibitions and not being free from the depression and the anxiety that I was trying to ease in others, that was intense. And my imagery became darker than it already was. I showed you, and I actually stepped out thinking, oh my goodness, this is really dark. So part of what I started doing was trying to do something that was a little more joyful. So I was working on, I've got some images that are a little friendlier. And part of that is because I need to also find color and peace, because you can't just like deal with angst all the time. That's not a balance. But we have to like find it. It's like a lot of us are doing yoga and meditating, and it's like self-care. I have my daughters to remind me. My daughters are your age, like they're college students and beyond, and that's something that I'm learning from them. I'm really good at beating myself up, but the caring part is something that you also have to throw in. Yeah, so I tried to articulate it in those last few pieces. And also the loss of both of my parents right before the pandemic, that was really important to work through it. And I found that to be really therapeutic. And I honestly had a moment like, oh, that's what art therapy is. That's what, that's what we have. We know this. We can do this. Developing my style, how did I do that? What was it like? Living, continually drawing. Draw your brains out. Draw, or paint. Whatever it is you do, do it a lot. Do it a lot, and don't be self-satisfied. Just keep doing it. Through observations, collections, and research. I'm continually understanding the forms and processes. So those become my reference materials, and I keep them. So the more you draw, the more you know, the more you have in your stash. And x-rays and MRIs are also a lot of fun. Every time I go, it's like, oh, I'm going to be needing a copy of that. Thank you. I always need it.
Also, there's some people who might have 11 a.m. classes, so if you can't have, then feel free to log off, but we have plenty of time to stay if you want to stay. I just wanted to invite, if people have 11 a.m. classes, that they can leave.
Okay, if anybody has to leave, do you have any questions, or? No? Should I go on a little?
Yes, definitely, keep going.
Okay. What advice would you give students and artists that are trying to find their personal style? Don't stop drawing. Develop a studio practice. Try to articulate what you're trying to say, describe, or trying to create a conversation about. Write those ideas down. I forget them. I forget my brilliant ideas. Write down those brilliant ideas. Taking a shower, stepping out of the shower. I think it's the heat really gives you clarity. Nobody's talking to you in the shower. Usually nobody's talking to you. And then it's like you come out with like these great ideas. So jot them down, have something ready to write down. Draw repeatedly until you have found a way to communicate what it is. So with my kids, they're like, Ma, have you drawn enough eyes? And I'm like, no, I haven't gotten where I need to be yet. So more eyes. So maybe you'll get there. Maybe the journey in trying to find clarity will take you somewhere else. Maybe somewhere more interesting. Work and keep working. Give yourself permissions. Don't beat yourself up. So I give you all permission to do heaps of crappy work. because it's plugging up and getting in the way of the good work. So your teacher, Ed Smith, gave me one of the best critiques I ever had. I think finding mentors, finding people that care about your work, keep them close. They will honestly care about your work. He was really motivational to me in a way that nobody else had been. How different is the process of working with students in higher education setting in comparison with collaborating with other professional artists? Working with students is sometimes similar to working with professional artists in that you're trying to communicate process for the benefit of their artwork. You're giving them tools and assistance. With the students, you're offering them that while also hoping to get them to challenge themselves and to take their ideas as seriously as you want to. Also, to working through the technical problems that arise. Collaborating with artists is about effective communication and tuning into what's needed at a given moment while being flexible to scrap it all in a moment's notice and to start all over again. Projects can take months or years. The difference between them and the student is that there's no reasoning with trying to make something work. You drop it. You back off. It's like, okay. And so that's the one thing. With students, you can nudge, and really get them to work it through. But with that relationship, that respect is paramount. In my printmaking classes, I trade prints with my students each semester, as colleagues would. So they become my colleagues. And this is something that I began when I started teaching my very first class, because I needed teaching tools. It couldn't just be my work. So slowly I phased out my work as examples and only had the best student work. And I have traded work with students and colleagues since I was a student. I have a print from every artist that I've worked with. I have a Kiki, I have a Jasper Johns, and I have prints that I traded when I was a student at Cooper. And it's incredible, and it keeps us connected. You know, artists, colleagues. I want to treat my students like colleagues. I think that's important. That respect. My students call me by my first name, and I've witnessed students being shut down by somebody saying, no, you call me professor, and it's like they forgot the question they were asking because somebody really needed to have that hierarchy. So maybe I'm wrong in sort of blurring it, but I don't think so. I'd rather have that open dialogue. As an artist and printmaker, I have had exciting moments. Okay, one big one that it sounds really goofy. Going to a museum opening for Jasper Johns retrospective and having my name on the placard with the other collaborators on, it was another Jasper Johns retrospective at MoMA, exactly 10 years after the one that I had seen the 0 through 9 lithographs in. I was like, oh yeah, credit given. I was so psyched. We went to a bunch of black tie events at the National Gallery in the Corcoran, one for Rauschenberg and one was for the 40-year celebration at ULE, which was pretty awesome. Antonio Francesconi, do any of you know his name? He was an awesome printmaker that I saw an exhibition of his work while I was a student at Cooper, and I was in a show with him, and I met him and I chatted with him. That to me was way cool. I was really beside myself with that. And I also had a chance to exhibit with my high school teacher a year before he died. And he said the only reason he agreed to be in the show was because I was in it. And it was great. This was somebody that was with me and pushed me from when I was a kid. So that was really meaningful. And as a professor, one thing that was really unexpected and really special, I received the Teaching Excellence Award, which was a student-nominated award, which sent me to Florence for 2 weeks, which was really great. And it was really special, just thinking that it wasn't something that was nothing, you know, that the students took the time, because you have to write letters. It's like writing letters of recommendation. It takes caring. So that was really special. And I've had terrific students go on to grad school. I have students now that have teaching posts, and they're collaborators. And one of the women that appeared in several of them is now working at ULAE. They wanted to hire me for doing freelance work, and I was like, I'm good, but I have somebody for you. And that's one thing that was really meaningful to me, to be able to connect. I find that really important. When I was a student, I didn't realize that I was working. I was being taught by professional printmakers, and they never revealed that. And nobody ever lifted a finger to make a phone call or to help push you along. So I feel that mentoring, I'm always nudging my colleagues. You got to do that. You got to do that, because even though it's easier now, you don't have to physically pound the pavement because there is the internet. You can communicate fast. We need to help each other out, and the art world is a small world. And pulling somebody up is how it's supposed to work. So that's something that makes me really happy and proud that my students are in good places because I cared. And I think that was.
Yeah. Does anyone have any additional questions?
I do. I was actually you answered my question. When you mentioned art therapy, like my heart skipped a beat because that's like my life. I want to be an art therapist, using so many different mediums. My internship, I'm working with a printmaker for this organization that like helps homeless people through housings. So yeah, I'm really thankful that I'm working with her and that I get to meet you, who's also a printmaker. And what's really ironic is that I'm actually doing a project right now that has to do with skulls. So yeah, I'm working with animal skeletons, like human skulls. I'm like getting references online, and seeing you work with all these different skeletons is like mind blowing that I get to meet you and that you're working through nature, because nature is just like, so there's so many stuff out there. So it's just like really cool that I get to talk to you, or that you get to talk to us about like nature and how that's kind of impacted your work. So thank you.
Thank you. I think that's what's magical, that it's accessible, and like my treasures. And it's funny, I put them in little fancy boxes and I bring them to kids, and they're like, oh, and I'm like, you know what this is? And it's like a seed pod. It's an itchy ball. It's it's a grape stem. It's the fact that I stopped and collected it and cared. I would have students that would be like, ooh, and squeamish about insects, only because I think that was the response that they were taught. So some of the drawings that I did of dragonflies were close-ups, just so that instead of putting the insect to show the kid, I would say, I enlarged this for you. Look at how adorable this little face is. I didn't say that the dragonfly actually does this to eat your face, but just to show that and slow down and to validate little young people's ideas. But working with printmaking is magical. It's like, I don't know if you have access to a press, but doing monoprints or relief prints or just leaf prints, taking impressions. And that's something that I feel really important. I as academic advisor now, and I'm really happy to be doing that, because I need to talk to you and like as students, what do you want to do? Besides this education, where are you going with it? What are you using it for? And those that want to do art therapy, I always nudge them into printmaking, not selfishly, only because there's skills and techniques that you could learn, that you can do it in the middle of a park. You could do it with nothing. You could do it with watercolor, with tea, you could do it with anything. And I think that thinking on your feet and creatively, and really knowing that you don't need fancy art supplies to make magic,
Yeah, I'm so thankful that I got to do printmaking with Ed like 2 semesters ago, and it was just a magical experience. It was awesome. So we appreciate you being here. Honestly, it's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I have a question, if you don't mind. Do you ever find it difficult to balance like that childlike curiosity that you say you have with like just having to like live your day, like having to look at things realistically and things like that? Do you ever have trouble balancing that?
Having things look realistically?
No, like so I'm actually a TA for Ed's basic printmaking class. So I've had to teach a couple lessons, and I think looking back at that, I've realized that I need to remember to experiment and have like those kind of new experiences. And some of that's just like Ed is always like, oh, find some random thing in the trash, and you realize it has all this potential. Do you ever have moments where you forget that these small things have potential? And if so, like, how do you balance that and get back to it?
So one of my, it's like I was trained as a professional printmaker. Working, oh, I think I missed one of my pages. So working with Jasper Johns, he was so professional. That was the thing. You had to be on top of your game. You said a little prayer that everything worked out perfectly, because you would lose the right to be in the room with him if you screwed anything up, and you were not coming back. Not for that project, not for any project. So being clean, not, I do not believe in happy accidents, which is a terrible thing to say. It's like, you know what you're doing, and experimenting is one thing. Being a slob and saying, oh, it works. I have a lot of trouble releasing that. So when doing the community art center, it's like somebody's like, happy accidents, playtime, playtime. I'm thinking, I have to lighten up, I have to lighten up, I have to lighten up. So there's a time and a place, and for my advanced students, I make sure that they do everything to professional standards, but I have to give them room to make images. And part of that came with like working with somebody like Kiki. Kiki Smith was all over the place. Everything was potential. Oh, I'm gonna be needing 20 mammograms. We would be printing mammogram images on Nepalese toilet paper for her to go and just do collage work. So having a degree of playfulness, I don't know. I learned how to like work with artists and temper it. And with my work, I try to I have two bodies of work, like this, the one that's focused on observing and learning, and the one that's just, I don't know what's talking to me, what's it saying, and who's talking to it in the same space. More with that. But with printmaking, it really is about evolving in an image. And I think lithography in particular, working on the same matrix and pushing it, because that initial image is yours, and transforming it the way that Jasper Johns would take a plate and be so familiar with the content that he could take it somewhere else. I think keeping it all in mind, how to stay serious and professional, be playful. It's like you have to have like multiple approaches, but you also, with a shared environment, that's something that was really, really serious. You make a mess, it becomes everybody's problem. So yeah, it's a hard thing, but you have to have rules. Like in a working space, my one big rule that I have, I with my drawing class is like, no, you can't draw from photos. That's easy. All the decisions have been made. All the seeing has been done. That's like the one thing. So teaching online was torture, because we were I was like, oh no, in the real world you would not be drawing from photos or images that are all locked in. Yeah, that's a hard one. Anybody else have any questions?
I do. When you were speaking earlier about kind of being frustrated doing others people other people's work for so long, and waiting for your opportunity. So is there a point where you kind of realized how to balance or prioritize your work a little bit more and more, so that you made time for that?
Yeah. So I found the page that I missed. So Elizabeth Murray was one of my artists that I felt collegial with. She had daughters, and it was funny because she would bring me hand-me-downs, because kids outgrow things. So we had a relationship that was very different, and I was very, very professional with her. And when we had that private time and space to work, I asked her, I'm like, Elizabeth, at what point did you start doing your work? Because she was teaching, and painting and raising kids is not, you don't dabble in that. You have to make a plan. And she said, I got a babysitter. I said, this is my time. So she actually started getting a serious studio practice in her 40s. And then it seemed like that was old to me. That's really pretty young. but the thing is, it's like that self-care. You have to make time for it and say it exists. And I think my problem happened when I was so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed when I got to ULAE, and one of the guys joked with me saying, you're among the gods of printmaking, when we went for our first lunch. And I said, I know. Like, in all earnestness, I know, you are my heroes, I know. And then we were working with the big shots, blue chip artists, really, really famous. And then part of the deal with that is it was on invitation only. And some of the more successful artists would make sales, therefore we could invite younger artists that would not really be profitable for the business, and it was on invitation only. So they were basically pulling up the younger artists to give them the opportunity for these collaborative experiences. And that's when it hit me. I was working with people close to my age. I was their hands, their artwork. And in my mind, I thought, you need to get back into the studio. Like, I didn't say it out loud. I was like, you do not deserve to have 6 people at your beck and call because you don't really know what you're doing. And I had seen enough very serious studio practice through all of the artists that I worked with to recognize the fact that somebody was still very young. And I thought, that's a really bad attitude for me to have. I don't belong here. I don't belong here, because we were only going to be working with younger and younger artists, because the older artists, they, you know, that joy of constant productivity wasn't that meaning. It was different for them, you know, over 20 years. And then I thought, I'm not going to be the best collaborator here because I am not in awe. There was very little awe. And I thought, it's my turn. And after just having a conversation with Elizabeth Murray, she said, you got to do this for yourself. You have to do this for yourself. And that was the one thing that was missing. So I am a greedy girl, and I've always wanted kids, and I want to be an artist, and I want to be a teacher, and I want this, and I want that, and I want the other. And I know too many women artists that feel I can't be a serious artist if I'm going to be a mom, because I'll be a terrible mom, and I'm going to drop the ball somewhere. So I had a really supportive husband who, when they were really little, he was the stay-at-home dad because I was the one with the health insurance, and we made it work. And I became more myself because of that opportunity, because I had support. And when I went back to school, I had a neighbor that said, I've got your back. I'll pick up the kids. I'll make it juggle. We ate a lot of pizza. We ate a lot of veggie burgers. When I wrote my thesis, they never wanted to see another veggie burger again. It was miserable, and it was selfish. And it was important for them to see that selfishness. It was important for my kids to see that in a point in my life, I wasn't happy, or I wasn't, that fulfillment had reached a pause, and I couldn't resume that pause without making a change. So you're going to find times in your life that you suddenly pause, and you're like, I've got to change something, because do I see myself doing this 5 more years? And if you don't, put it out to the universe. Say what you want. For real, put it out to the universe and say what you want. I may not be able to help you, but I might know somebody that does. Like, you literally don't just like knock to an empty room or a field. Put it out to the universe. Say it out loud so that idea becomes real. The opportunities are there. You have networks. Sometimes they'll be secretive and they don't want to show that they're your network, but some people are really ready and happy to be your network. But you have to put it out there, and you're entitled to every last little bit of whatever it is you want. Every bit of it. Because you know what? We're going to get old no matter what. And if you feel stuck in a place you don't want to be, you're the one that decided that. And it's terrifying to take a leap. It's terrifying when you got responsibilities or a family or all the things that you feel safe with that you thought that were accomplishments. But you have to do that because it's you. Nobody's going to do it for you. And making your art and realizing I've lived enough to have things to say. So another thing about going to grad school right after your undergraduate work, sometimes taking a pause and knowing why you're going is a helpful thing. Getting some experience, getting images, getting confidence, knowing why you're there is always a good thing. It's like, why am I going there? Or in life, really, why am I doing that? Sometimes because I feel like it, because I'm curious. That's good enough. But like, ask yourself, why am I doing this? Who's it pleasing? Not that you only have to please yourself, but you can't put yourself last. I'm very good at that. My kids have to remind me. I think you guys, your generation, you have a stronger sense of yourself. Me, I'm just like, I'm not loving this, and I'm still not loving this. So, and it's really funny because being invited to work with the kids as a visiting artist came to me at a time where I needed something to get mixed up. I needed something thrown in. When I was invited to be a consultant for setting up the space at the gallery, I was also at a pause where I'm like, not that I was getting bored. I was like, I've got more to do, and I'm not doing it here. So yeah, when you want something done, ask the busiest person. It was like that, and I'm busy, but I'll always be happy to like make time to make things happen. Yeah, it's tricky, but you have to figure it out. But you have to love yourself enough to say, I want it all, and just say, so what? I'm a greedy girl. So what? I want it all. I get it all.
Does anyone have any final questions? Awesome. Thank you so much, Lorena, for meeting with us. This has been absolutely amazing. I loved looking at your work and hearing from you about your experiences, and I know the rest of the class has. So I just want to thank you again.
Thank you. It was so nice speaking with all of you. I wish you all the best. Ed knows how to contact me. You guys can contact me, honestly. The world is here for you. It's like I know people, you know people, we know Ed. Ed is awesome, and you are really lucky to have him. My art teacher, my high school art teacher, was my hero because he saw that I could be pushed hard, and not everybody can be pushed hard. So you have to like really get a feeling for not being a brute about it. But he pushed me hard, and Ed is like that. So if Ed does that to you, it's out of pure love, and it'll help you. It's good for your metabolism too. It's very good.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you so much for meeting with us.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.